Have you ever wondered why some women vanish from a man's life, yet haunt him for years afterward? Not because of what she gave him, but because of what she awakened. Most women leave memories. A rare few leave reflections of everything he was too weak to confront. These women don't beg to be remembered. They're remembered because they didn't beg. And long after the noise of the world dulls, he'll hear the silence she left behind, echoing in the chambers of his ego. There is a kind of woman who imprints not on his skin, but on his psyche. She becomes the ghost of what he couldn't become to keep her. What makes her unforgettable isn't beauty or sweetness. It's the psychic shift she triggers. And the truth? By the time he realizes it, she's already gone. Today, we uncover the 8 psychological traits of a woman men regret losing forever, rooted in Jungian archetypes, Anima projections, and the emotional gravity of the rare feminine. The mirror is not a man. Why do so many women look into men expecting to find themselves reflected back? It's the oldest trap, believing he will finally validate your worth, echo your pain, or complete the parts you fear facing alone. But here's the secret. Men do not mirror your wholeness. They mirror your wounds until you shatter the illusion. In the unconscious male psyche, there exists what Carl Jung called the Anima, his inner feminine. But when he hasn't made peace with her, he projects that unmet emotional world onto real women. He doesn't love her. He loves what she awakens in him. And when she awakens too much, when she reflects the parts of him he fears, he leaves, not because of her, but because of his own emotional poverty. A woman who no longer needs to be mirrored becomes unforgettable. She is not reactive. She doesn't chase. She doesn't collapse into roles. She simply exists in the full bloom of her emotional maturity. And this unsettles him because she is not an echo, but a revealer. Men forget women who molded themselves to be loved, but the woman who stood as a mirror to his unconscious haunts him. She becomes a symbol of the self he abandoned. You've felt this before, haven't you? The weight of bending, hoping, softening your roar just to be held. What if you stopped? What if you became the mirror he couldn't break? Imagine a woman standing still while the world distorts around her, her gaze unshaken, her heart uncollapsed. The one who does not need you is the one you remember the longest. But to become unforgettable, a woman must first betray the myth that love is reflection, because what waits beyond that myth is sovereignty. And with that sovereignty comes a deeper test, where validation meets silence. Let's go deeper. Her silence rewrote his ego. Why do men remember the woman who stopped explaining herself? Not the one who screamed, begged, or performed, but the one who walked away with grace so quiet it thundered through his being. You see, a man's ego feeds on reaction. It thrives on knowing it still has a grip on your emotional rhythm, that it can wound and still be worshipped. But when a woman reclaims her emotional gravity and withdraws her energy, her attention, her story, something primal happens. His control fractures. This isn't about playing games. This is about withdrawing your psychic energy from the illusion that you owe someone access to your pain. A powerful woman doesn't perform her suffering. She integrates it. And in that integration, she stops dancing for closure. He doesn't regret losing her because she was soft. He regrets losing her because her absence forced him to face what his presence never did, his emotional inadequacy. The woman who becomes unforgettable is not the one who pleads to be heard. It's the one who realizes she was never truly seen and leaves before her soul is buried beneath the performance. Maybe you've silenced yourself too long, spoken when your silence would have screamed louder, asked for love that demanded you shrink. Picture this, you sitting at a table of chaos, calmly standing and walking away without a word because your energy is no longer a currency to be negotiated. He will remember your silence, louder than than your forgiveness. But silence is not absence, it's power. And that power begins with the next principle. When a woman stops betraying herself to belong, she stopped begging to be chosen. Why do women tie their worth to being wanted, then bleed themselves dry trying to remain wanted enough? In the unconscious mind, the need to be chosen often masks a deeper wound, the fear of being invisible without someone else's gaze. But here's the truth that shatters illusions. When a woman is addicted to being chosen, she forgets to choose herself. The woman men regret losing doesn't orbit a man's approval. She becomes the center of her own gravity. She does not mold, morph, or minimize herself for acceptance. She chooses presence over performance, power over pleasing. To the unawakened man, she feels dangerous because she cannot be controlled by charm or guilt. And when he realizes she needed nothing from him except honesty, it's already too late. Women who abandon themselves for love are easily forgotten. But the one who refused to dim her light to fit into his shadows, she's unforgettable because she burns into memory as the standard he'll never reach again. What if you stopped begging to be enough and became undeniable? What if your worth no longer hinged on being desired but declared from within? Visualize this: a throne in a dark room. No spotlight, no audience, just you, seated, still, unshaken. You are not waiting to be crowned. You were born the crown. The moment you stop chasing love is the moment it starts chasing you. But most women never realize this truth because they're too busy shrinking to fit into someone else's scarcity. Which leads us to the next revelation. Love becomes bondage the moment you betray your standards. She chose her standards over her sentiments. Why do so many women stay loyal to a connection that starves their spirit, but abandon themselves the moment they feel too much? There is a devastating lie buried deep in the feminine psyche that love must hurt to be real, that loyalty means enduring emotional malnutrition. But the woman he regrets is not the one who stayed loyal to his potential. It's the one who outgrew it. She chose truth over tenderness, standards over sentiment, boundaries over history. When a woman reclaims her standards, not as defense, but as devotion to her own emotional safety, she becomes psychologically untouchable. She no longer dances with ghosts of who he could be. She sees what is and walks away without explanation. This is where most men fail to keep her, because they confuse emotional intensity with emotional intimacy. They mistake her softness for submission until she leaves, and only then do they realize her absence is the presence of her standard. You've done this before, rationalized his chaos, lowered your bar, clung to potential like it was love. But what if you became unavailable to anything that asked you to shrink? Picture a velvet rope pulled across your inner world. Only those who match your emotional depth, your clarity, your integrity, enter. The rest? They watch from a distance. You were not too much. He was simply too small to hold what you carry. And as her standards rise, something radical happens. She stops trying to earn love and starts embodying it. That's when the true shift occurs. Because the next kind of woman, she doesn't just leave quietly. She redefines what loss feels like. She was the mirror and the exit. Why do some women leave a man shattered? Not because she broke him, but because she reflected the fracture already inside him. There's a moment that comes for every man who loses a woman of depth, the reckoning, not with her, but with himself. Because she wasn't just love. She was a mirror. She was a map. She was a myth he couldn't live up to. Carl Jung spoke of the Anima, the inner feminine that lives in the unconscious psyche of every man. When undeveloped, it's not embraced. It's projected. He sees her and believes she holds his lost pieces. But the moment she reveals that she's not a fantasy, not a void to be filled, not an extension of his ego. He resists. He withdraws. He sabotages, because he realizes he must now face himself. But the unforgettable woman doesn't try to fix his fear. She doesn't make herself smaller just to feel safe in his chaos. She walks, not in rage, not in revenge, but with the quiet knowing that healing isn't her responsibility unless it's her own. And this exit, it becomes the event. He may never say it, but it burns. Because she wasn't just another failed connection. She was a chance at wholeness that his unconscious wasn't ready to claim. And when the fantasy dissolves, when her silence doesn't beg for closure, he's left with a wound he cannot project away. Because she didn't fight to be seen, she became the reflection he tried to avoid. You've done this too. Stayed too long hoping he'd finally see you beneath the projection. What if you stopped being his emotional scaffolding? What if you became the doorway he couldn't walk back through? Picture a man reaching back and finding nothing but silence. The same silence he once weaponized against you, now echoing inside him like an unanswered question. You weren't hard to love, you were just impossible to possess. And once a woman tastes that kind of freedom, where she's no longer a character in someone else's unfinished myth, she begins to embody something even more haunting: emotional sovereignty. The kind of presence that doesn't just leave a man missing her, it forces him to meet the version of himself that could never keep her. But what happens when a woman no longer uses love as proof of worth? What becomes of her when she chooses depth over attention and inner alignment over emotional entertainment? That's when she becomes the rarest kind of storm. She let the storm change her, not drown her. Why do some women suffer and soften, while others suffer and disappear? There's a brutal psychological truth at the core of feminine power. You will be tested through heartbreak, but you are not meant to die inside it. You are meant to be transformed. Most women collapse after betrayal. They internalize rejection. They shrink in its wake. They think, if I was just more patient, prettier, quieter. And so the cycle continues. Until one day, she doesn't shatter. She sheds. This is the moment where the unforgettable woman is born, not from ease, but from ashes. Because she let the storm change her, but not define her. She didn't chase closure. She became it. She didn't beg for apologies. She healed the part of herself that once needed them. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That transformation doesn't come through love, it comes through loss. Through looking at the wreckage and not asking why it happened, but what it revealed. A woman becomes truly dangerous when she no longer fears solitude, when she no longer begs the universe to give her someone who sees her, but commits to seeing herself with ruthless clarity. She stops looking for healing in men who aren't even whole within themselves. And the man who once mistook her kindness for weakness? He watches her rise, not in drama, but in dignity. He sees her build a life that doesn't orbit around him, and that image stays lodged in his mind like a prophecy he dismissed too soon. You've carried pain like proof. What if you carried it like power? What if the betrayal wasn't a punishment, but a purification? Visualize yourself walking through the wreckage of an old version of love, not with sadness, but with sacred rebellion. Not waiting for a new man to choose you, but choosing the woman you were always becoming. She didn't heal to be softer, she healed to be sovereign. And that sovereignty leads to something deeper still, not just freedom from him, but freedom from needing him. That's what we'll face next, the most haunting truth of all. She never needed saving. She needed remembering. She never needed saving. She needed remembering. Why do women wait for a man to awaken the parts of themselves they already carry? Why do they believe that being chosen by him will finally unlock the permission to be who they truly are? This is the great betrayal, the forgetting of self that begins with the hope of being rescued. From a young age, women are conditioned to believe love is something given to them, that identity is something reflected back to them, that power is something earned through him. And so she waits, she overextends, she performs. She edits herself to fit into the emotional architecture of a man who hasn't even built a foundation for himself. But the unforgettable woman? She doesn't wait to be chosen, she chooses. She doesn't cling to a man as a savior. She remembers who she was before the world taught her to forget. And once she remembers, she becomes emotionally untouchable. Jungian psychology teaches us that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not a romantic act. It is a spiritual crucifixion. It requires you to confront the false selves you wore to survive. The woman who rises from this fire doesn't just have boundaries, she becomes one, a living embodiment of sacred limits. And when a man meets this woman, when he sees she doesn't orbit around his validation, that she's not flattered by breadcrumbs, that her soul has already tasted its own nectar, he either rises to meet her or he flees. But either way, she is not moved. You've waited before, haven't you? Waited for someone to see you, choose you, save you. What if the only person who needed to see you was the version of you buried beneath all that waiting? Visualize this, you standing in front of a mirror, not to fix yourself, not to compare, but to remember that before love became a performance, you were already whole, already enough, already more than anyone could ever earn. The woman who remembers herself no longer fears being forgotten by others. And when she lives from that place, where remembrance becomes her foundation, not only does she become immune to manipulation, she becomes the test most men fail. Because she no longer settles for being loved partially, she knows her worth doesn't negotiate. But this journey doesn't end with sovereignty, it evolves. Because the final truth, she doesn't just move on, she becomes the lesson. She became the lesson he'll never unlearn. Why do some men chase 1,000 women after losing one, not for pleasure, but to forget? To erase the ghost of the woman who didn't just leave, but left him with a mirror he couldn't smash. This kind of woman doesn't just pass through his life, she reroutes it. Not with chaos, but with clarity. She forced him to face the man he was pretending to be, and in her departure, she dismantled the illusion that he could be both emotionally absent and eternally adored. The unforgettable woman becomes the myth he can't rewrite, the silence he can't fill. She isn't vengeful, she doesn't seek revenge, she doesn't wish harm. Her existence is the echo of a standard. She was the lesson. And it was delivered with such grace, it stung worse than rage ever could. She didn't just walk away, she walked forward. And that forward movement is what kills him slowly, not because he was entitled to her presence, but because he never truly saw it while he had it. She healed the part of herself that once needed to be remembered, and by doing so, she ensured she would never be forgotten. In Jungian terms, she became his shadow integration crisis, the moment where he is forced to reconcile with his own limitations. She was the invitation to evolve, and the reminder of what happens when that invitation is declined. And you, yes, you. What if you stopped fearing that someone won't regret losing you, and started living in a way that guarantees they will? What if your healing became the scar they carry? Picture this, a man standing in a crowded room, surrounded by noise, attention, affection, and none of it reaches him, because the one voice he longs for is the one he silenced. She moved on, he stayed haunted. This is the power of the woman who does the work, who breaks the pattern, who doesn't just rise from the ashes, but builds an empire from them, not for him. But because she finally understood, she was never the echo, she was the origin. And the story doesn't end here, it begins now with the woman who no longer fears being left, because she has already arrived. Some women are remembered for how they loved. The rare ones are remembered for how they left. She was never soft because she feared breaking. She was soft because she had already broken and chosen to rise. She stopped seeking mirrors in men's eyes because real reflection begins in silence, not seduction. Her quiet was not a withdrawal, it was a weapon, the kind of silence that humbles the loudest egos. She no longer begged to be chosen. She realized anything she has to chase, she will eventually outgrow. She picked standards over stories, because sentiment without respect is a slow form of self-erasure. She didn't just reflect his wounds, she held up a mirror to his potential and watched him flinch. She let the pain alchemize her, not into someone colder, but someone unshakably clear. And in the end, she stopped needing to be saved. Because remembering who you are is the ultimate rescue. She became the lesson. And some men never recover from it. Now breathe, not to relax, but to return. The truth is, the woman who awakens a man's soul is not always the one who stays. She is the rupture, the edge, the sacred undoing of all his illusions. But she doesn't carry his regret like a crown. She carries her clarity like a flame. Because this path, the path of deep feminine awakening, is not about being wanted. It is about becoming so whole, so sovereign, so inwardly complete that being wanted is no longer your highest achievement. Being unalterable is. As Jung once wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." So now the invitation is not outward, but inward. Your silence isn't weakness. It's the beginning of your return to yourself. Your detachment isn't bitterness. It's the first language of self-respect. You don't need to be louder. You need to be truer. Let them remember you, not for how you bent, but for how you never broke. So the question now is this: what part of you still waits to be chosen when you were meant to choose yourself all along? Subscribe to Jung Mind, where your shadow speaks and your soul finally listens.